Welcome to what is this? The bonus episode. This is the very first, bonus episode of this new era of the podcast. So thank you for joining us. Now, this episode, I believe, is coming out right now. It should be about midnight, if I'm not mistaken. It'll either be 11 or midnight when this is coming out. So thank you for tuning in. It's crazy that we're doing this. So tonight we're gonna just go deep into 70s horror and talk about what I would don as the best horror. So thank you for joining. This is a bonus to the current episode that's coming out, which is episode 36. So this is a bonus episode. So check out episode 36. We get deep. We go deep. We get spooky on there too. So anyways, thank you for watching. If you enjoy this content, leave a like and subscribe. And otherwise, let's get started. It's been weird with Halloween, I feel like October is going. It seems like everybody's posting about October going by real quick. Last year, I did like put up some decorations in my room. I didn't really. I don't remember if I really even had a costume, but this year it does feel like Halloween is kind of like a third thought. Maybe you know. I don't know. I don't hear too many people talking or getting hyped about Halloween plans. And I was gonna go and dress up as Smoke and Stack from Sinners, but it's too expensive. I would have to get a whole costume, and I didn't have enough time, more money, to get it. So maybe next year. But yeah, I'm like, damn, next week this is Halloween, and I'm not even ready. So what I wanted to do this episode, I wanted to do something Halloween themed. I wanted to, and I thought of it last minute, which is why we can't really do it this episode. But what I wanted to do was, since I'm a film guy, I wanted to watch, like, I'm not gonna say like put a definitive list on like these are the best ones, because there's so many horror movies that came out between the 70s and the 90s that were, I think, that were very well done, fundamental and pivotal in the genre, for the industry, and just like in terms of just speaking about the world, right? Like there's so many that could hit those categories, 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. So I was like, I want to just pick ones that I personally, that they either actually scared me, or I felt like they did some really cool stuff for the time period that to me became iconic staples for other films. So I do. I reason why we can't do this necessarily in full, because I didn't think of this till like Wednesday. It's Friday, or it's Saturday. I didn't think of this till like Wednesday. So going from the 70s to the 2010s, 5 movies each is what I wanted to do for each decade, and that's like 50 movies. Even I can't watch 50 movies in 4 days. Unfortunately, I have a job, so I got through all the 70s and one 80s movie. And even then, I was like, this might be enough for us to kind of jump into. We couldn't, obviously, since I didn't get a chance to go through all of these. We won't have a really cool list of like what I would consider to be the best movies of the past 50 years in terms of horror. But I did make a list, and I did look through the ones on the 70s, and we can at least talk about that, because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to 70s horror movies, at least. What's on my list of the top horror movies of the 70s is going to be a weird list. I'll be honest. It's not. The thing is, right, it's going to blow people's minds. I didn't put Halloween on there. I don't remember why. I guess because part of the criteria was like it had to actually scare me, and Halloween didn't scare me. Nightmare on Elm Street isn't on the 80s list or anything like that, because to me that shit wasn't necessarily scary. I can see why it was scary for the 80s, but I felt Freddy Krueger is more funny than scary. So I was like, nah, I can't put him on the list because it doesn't actually scare me. So the ones on the 80s, literally everything on this list, either it scared me when I watched it for the first time, or it still kind of like is crazy to and intense to watch now. Let's see. We got this is now, to me, I think this list is pretty solid. We got Alien, we got Carrie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Exorcist. Right? So when I look at that list, right, I'm like, the reason I didn't put Halloween on that list, because I think Texas Chainsaw does it a little better, It's two different concepts though. I'm not going to go into the history of slasher films because one, not that smart. Two, it's not that important in terms of why it's on this list, but there is an acknowledgement like slasher films, the start of Halloween, right? The first one rather, and how that evolved, like this idea of neighborhood terror, things like that. And Halloween is an honorable mention, but it's just not on the list because maybe it's scary. When I was a kid, I remember we went like this was when trick or treating was kind of. We went to Berkeley, and they had like this strip of like there are these houses where people actually got into it and like not just decorated, but they turned their house into a haunted house and let people walk through and shit like that. I remember as a child there was one house where they had someone dressed in a Michael Myers mask and dude was just standing at the entrance. Scared the shit out of me, traumatized me as a kid, to be honest, because that was the first time I actually saw Michael Myers in person, right? So I was like, oh fuck, now I see why him just standing there is terrifying. Soulless eyes, And I'm a child too, so I'm like literally bawling, crying, because I don't want him. I can't go past this kid. You're right, this dude in this costume. So that's the only time Mike Myers has actually scared me is when I saw him in person. Honorable mention. I do have a video here of top 70s horror movies. Some of the movies I mentioned are on this list, some are not. Dawn of the Dead, I did not put on this list. Not because I don't think it's a great movie. I love George Romero, Night of the Living Dead. I'm a zombie fan, so all those movies are iconic to me. Dawn of the Dead doesn't catch me though. I prefer the remake. Just a little bit scarier, a little bit more my type of movie, whatever. But I know that that's something that people really love for some reason. I just couldn't get into it. I just found it too boring. I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. I've tried to rewatch that movie like 4 or 5 times in my life. Can't do it. So I don't know how to rank my movies because they all are like, okay, if I had to put something at the bottom of the list, I feel like Invasion of the Body Snatchers would be at the bottom of my list. I'll have my list up on screen here so that way we keep track of what movies we're going through. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is number 5 for me. Watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers, thought it was great, watched it the other night. The only thing I had with it, I was like, a lot of these movies in the 70s, what they really do well is they know how to make a slow burn. So a lot of the times it's these long-standing shots. A lot of the times it's these slow pans, and you see this in pretty much every '70s movie. You see this like slow reveal, both visually and in the story of what the big creature, evil, scary thing is. Oftentimes, it's kind of drawn out, and that's fine. Like it's a great. There's so many cool shit that happens with these '70s films, artistically, camera-wise, like as a film person, as someone who studies films and went to school for it, I see so many nuanced things happening in all of these films. And I see like how they have really set the foundation for what we see today. Like there are so many cool things and the gravitas of it all. Like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Alien, pretty much every movie on this list kind of opens up with this wondrous opening like of this thing that we're about to experience, but like they won't, like they're really showcasing you like you're gonna we're going into this world and it's gonna be about this thing, and with Invasion it's about the microorganisms or whatever floating through space, landing on Earth, getting onto the plants, and you kind of get this untold narrative of like something scary is happening. We know it's happening, but the people on the screen don't know it's happening, and we don't know quite what it is. And I think what's cool is that in the 70s, all these movies touch on pretty much the same narrative because in the 70s you had the Vietnam War, you had the rise of peace, love, and freedom of expression, whatever. A lot of these movies, like in the background, you're constantly kind of hear about all these terrible things happening, like not necessarily like whether it is about the war or about the amount of crimes happening or the amount of like just crime happening. Like it kind of is a surgeons, and it makes you think like, okay, we're in the 1970s. What was happening in the 60s? Because when you hit the 80s and you look at like people love the 80s for like the stuff that came out of it, the technology, the entertainment, the clothes, the fashion, the whatever, everything, right? The 80s rocks. And it's like between the 60s and the 80s, the 70s is a very interesting spot when you start to watch these movies back to back because the way they portray so many different things. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is essentially, in simple terms, It is about the fear of the other, the fear of the foreign enemy, the fear of blah 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 because of war, all these other things. That's kind of the concept where it's like you can't trust. You're getting into this world where you can't trust society. You can't trust your neighbors. You don't know who's who. You don't know because now that lifestyle's kind of changed now, where people aren't like knowing their neighbors or knowing if they can trust their neighbors in a literal sense, as opposed to like in the 50s or in the 60s, where that was more of a common thing. And even then, the way they portray teenagers is interesting because in the 70s, you have things like the Vietnam War going on. You have a lot of young people wanting peace in the world, and you see a lot of how teenagers are perceived in the way that they want to express themselves. Not necessarily touching on the fact that in a lot of movies in the 70s and even in the 80s, right, they show teenage girls, nude sexualization of that. And there's papers on this shit. And I didn't read the papers, but I will because essentially what they're saying is part of this is about that freedom of sexuality, freedom of self, or part of that peace, whatever, you know. I'm like, that's interesting. It is strange to look at now, but it is like a perspective of what was going on at the time. Because you look at Carrie, right? And that literally the opening is a bunch of, seemingly high school girls in the locker room naked, playing around and shit. Looking at that in 2025, it's like, yeah, why would you? How is this something that everybody was cool with and didn't really question? But then you got to look at the time period, what was going on. That type of shit will never happen now, right? So Invasion of Body Snatchers is at the bottom because though it's about the fear of the neighbors or the society of not knowing who's who type situation, not knowing who's with you, who's against you, trying to replace you. I love that concept because you see that in John Carpenter's work as he starts making, I forgot what it's called. Is it See No Evil? I'm just gonna put it on the screen. The John Carpenter one where, it's about society being fucking what's the word? Brainwashed or whatever, mind controlled with like subliminal messaging. Right? Same concept. And then you also see that in movies later on as time goes on. And it's so cool to see that transition because you have the faculty, which basically redoes Invasion of the Body Snatchers directly. But John Carpenter does it a lot more creatively, and a lot more films later on does it a lot more creatively. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is dope in that concept. It's just too much of a slow burn for me. I love the ending's great. Not gonna spoil the ending, but it's just overall too much of a slow burn. So we're gonna give that a bottom. All these movies to me, 4.5 out of 5 though. Like it's very hard to say that they're anything other than above the standard. Like I threw like the suggestion into Gemini for a moment just to like give me some ideas of what we can do. And one of the things that it pointed out that I read was like between in the 80s, not in the 70s, but in the 80s, there was this practical effects race going on. There was a race to like make the best practical effects visuals. And what's funny is when I started this list, I watched Evil Dead before I even watched the 70s. And in Evil Dead, there is so Evil Dead is such a goofy ass movie, right? If you've seen it. And that's what we think today. It's a goofy ass movie. But if you watch it in the 80s, it's so terrifying. The jump scares, the actual makeup, the work of all of it, it's actually really terrifying. Because there are so many things that actually happen in that movie where I was like, holy shit, that actually was scary. Because there was no music, there was no build up, there was no bread. It just happens, right? Like the face just pops up or the dude just rises up or whatever. And then the practical effects, like the amount of work they put in for some of those moments, like there's moments where like their skin dissolving and all like the I'm not gonna like the ending is literally like just 10 minutes of like let's just put our dick on the table of the amount of special effects and practical real effects that we have that we're going to do. We're going to do time lapse. We're going to have this shit spewing out. We're going to have this thing coming out of his guts. We're going to, like they're going to the nine with this shit. And I'm like, oh, this is the race, right? Because when you go back into the 70s and you look at something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I think I'm going to put at the top of my list. I don't. It's hard to rank these, to be honest. They all fit in the bubble of just the same energy. But you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you look at that movie. You look at the opening alone, right, where it's that grotesque image of the body on the tombstone, right? I remember seeing that, and I remember I never saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a kid. I saw it for the first time in college for a class, and when they showed that scene, I literally jaw dropped. I had never seen anything like that before, and this was in the '70s. Like the set design was on a scale I had never seen before. So then you go into the '80s and you understand why this practical effects race is happening, because it's like, bro, imagine seeing something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? And you're in the middle of producing Evil Dead, and it's like, yo, how are we gonna get onto that level? How can we bring that level of mastery to this movie, right? Because it's two different movies, but you see it and you see where that like competition kind of comes from within the industry, and I'm like, that's so beautiful to see. You don't really see that or notice it too well nowadays because CGI and shit like that. But with practical effects, you can really see that, and it's so prominent in all these movies. Carrie, not so much because it's telekinesis, so it's not like, it's not a lot of like monster things happening. But even then, you have an entire house collapse. You have all these cool angles and shots that are being utilized to the degree. And this is where you get that foundation of like using the A B shots or using the Dutch angles, like the influences from them seeing German films, right? And be like, I want to put this in this movie with Texas Chainsaw, that practical effects showcases their heart. It's the first image, and then it's just consistent, right? And what's crazier is, since Texas Chainsaw is based on a real case, right, a real situation, that's what makes it even more terrifying. Is like, this was happening for real. Texas Chainsaw, I think, has to be at the top of the list. That movie says a lot, and it gives away a lot about not just what happened in that case, but what's happening in the world at that time. The opening credits, under it, as the credits are playing, you can hear like a radio going on, and it's talking about all these different things going on. It's talking about all these different illnesses, all these different crimes, all these different, right? And it's like, sounds like the world is on fire. That's crazy, because there's the one half of the '70s that's peace, love. There's the other half that's war, and then there's the other half of society feeling like things are collapsing. And that's what you're pretty much getting in all of these movies, is all these different perspectives of how society is changing, is how it's falling apart, how there's so much crime now, or whatever. So Texas Chainsaw is at the bottom, is at the top. Invasion Body Snatchers is at the bottom. That's how we're gonna keep that. That's gonna be simple, right? Can you get past Texas Chainsaw? Again, it's hard to rank these, but if I had to, this is how we're doing it. I'm gonna say no. Number 4. Let's say what number 4 is. Number 4 has to be The Exorcist. And that, I'm making this up as we go right now. The Exorcist scares the shit out of me. I watched it last year for the first time in full. Scared the fuck out of me. Fucking scene with her coming down the stairs. Not gonna put it here. Just go watch the movie. Not gonna tell you when it happens. Just go watch the movie, and then you'll be traumatized. You'll be happy. The Exorcist is also based on the whole idea of mental illness versus spiritual intervention, or religious beliefs, right? The whole idea of if people are actually being possessed or if it's some type of schizophrenic situation. Fascinating history in that. I'm not going to go too deep into it. Didn't do the research on it. But I do remember learning about this. And that's kind of what the point of a lot of like exorcist films are touching on, is whether or not people are actually being possessed by something supernatural, or if they are being, or if they have some type of mental illness, or what, or are just pretending, which is a huge conversation, mind you, with the whole Conjuring situation. The Warrens, right? You can look them up, and there's endless information about scams or not being real or playing it up, whatever. So this is a conversation happening in the '70s. Is that young? I think I should have did research. I think mainly young girls being possessed by demons, talking in tongues, things like that, and churches and things like that denying it. So you see a lot of that in The Exorcist. You see a lot of this within this coming of age story of this little girl. She plays with the Ouija board. She has been playing with the Ouija, which is crazy. These movies, they kind of just start in the middle of some of these cases. The Exorcist kind of just picks us up in the middle of what the little girl has been doing. In the dialogue, she even says like she talks to the ghost. She has been already. It's not like that was the scene with her with the board and them doing it. That wasn't the first time. She's been doing it, and it's also happening. It's been happening for a while, right? But it's never like presented in front of you until like pretty much towards halfway, if not later in the film. Whereas nowadays, The Conjuring is basically a redoing of The Exorcist, damn near exactly. It's just more children. There's no father in the picture of The Exorcist, but there's a father in this one. So there's some changes to that, but The Exorcist touches on a lot of these religious things, obviously, aside from the obvious of the devil and church and being possessed. But like, I think a part of it is the fact that there's no father in the household is something that they were kind of touching on. I think it's the fact of this coming of age for young girls, because Carrie touches on that, right? That's the whole point of Carrie, and the fears of what your children will become. I guess it's hard to imagine as a parent in the 70s, right? That means you were raised experiencing civil rights movements on top of Cold War, on top of if you didn't you knew someone, if not majority of the men in your family went into war, whether it was the first or the second, right? And I remember looking into all of this because it's like this shaped a lot of different households. This is what killed the nuclear family, because fathers were going to war or even coming home from work, and their sons would see their father in a different way because the father was not as loving or as whatever. They were either PTSD'd or they're so burnt out from the work of the Industrial Revolution or whatever that they are absent when they come home. So then boys grow up to develop this sort of same mentality. And that's why you see such a difference in the 80s, where since there is no war, there is none of that, right? Things are much different, much lighter. Boys can grow up to be a little bit more reckless or a little bit more goofy, a little bit more immature, which is what you get in the 80s. But they also have some bad traits, because women were getting abused in the 70s regularly. And if you grow up seeing your father hit your mother, right, as a way to show authority or whatever, in the 80s, you see a lot of that happen. You see that in Evil Dead. It's crazy. So, as a filmmaker, as a director, when you're writing stuff, right, like you try to paint a picture of what the world is and what's happening from your perspective. And you see through these 5 movies this kind of interesting layer of what society was like for young boys, young girls, families, and in some cases, corporate, uh, not corporate, but working class people. So Exorcist is at number 4. Number 3, it's really tough to put Carrie above Alien. I think that's a crazy take, but I'm probably gonna do it. So number 3 is Alien. Alien. The further we continue as a society, the more the world of Alien makes sense. Not in the sense of them discovering alien life, in the sense of corporate greed. And I think it's so crazy because it's like you make these movies, right, in the 70s, right, and you portray these corporations who are out for only money, resources, power. And then keep in mind, we now have Alien Earth, where we understand that much more, where these companies are in a race to get these alien species understand to not only attain some type of immortality, but to like essentially just become the corporation that becomes the most dominant, the most powerful. It's not too dissimilar to what we have today and what we've always had, right? We have companies fighting for in a race for AGI and things like that. Now we have billionaires and companies and things like that and corporations that essentially run the world, right? And when you're on the working class end of that, you are expendable, but you never expect that to actually be true until it is true, whether that's by getting fired unfairly or being laid off, or in the case of Alien, you know, you guys were there to collect ores trying to get home, and now you're being lied to about a distress signal, and you're all now expendable for the sake of bringing home this damn near unkillable creature, right? Because this company, Wayland, wants to be super dominant in the world, wants to find a key to immortality, and this creature could be that. So fuck everybody, fuck every human that's here. They're expendable now. Let's figure this out. That's pretty much the concept of Alien, of the entire Alien franchise, which is wild, right? I put Alien under Carrie mainly because Aliens does a lot of cool shit set design wise, right? And when you watch these movies back to back, I ended on Alien, and Alien came out in 1979, so right up on the edge of the 80s. And to be honest, it was kind of mind blowing to be like, to go from watching Texas Chainsaw, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Carrie, The Exorcist, and then you hit Alien, and it's in 1979, right? And you're about to hit the 80s, and knowing what comes in the 80s, all these wonderful movies, all these iconic movies, all these like changes in the world, fantastic changes in the world, just this pop culture boom. And Alien opens up with us entering space, right? With this fear of we've explored society. We explored the fears of society, the fears of the home, the fears of the family, the fears of the woods, the fear of the supernatural. But now we're going to go deeper. We're going to go farther. We're going to go into the unknown. We're going to go into a new age, right? And Alien, like the opening really sets this up as we're like transitioning from what has been to a whole new thing in the genre, right? And we all know how Alien itself has been a icon in the genre, both for not just female main character heroines, but just in the genre overall, right? It's had so many accolades on it. But that opening, right? I'm like, after seeing everything and then getting to this, I'm like, we're about to hit the 80s, dude. Like, I can only imagine being in the audience, right? Watching this in 1979. It's like, man, movies are gonna be unreal. That's just what I would imagine my thought would be. Nothing up until that point on this list, right? Is showing stuff like this. Vast space, technology that we've never seen, robots, set designs, unlike anything. It's one thing to make grotesque figures and things like that. People they got really good with that. But like to be able to capture space, right? And I don't remember when Star Wars came out. I don't really care. But I'm saying this did it for horror. It made it scary. It made space immediately scary for the exact reasons that people probably already found space scary, right? And it wasn't us exploring the moon. It wasn't anything like this is for America. This is silent. You're just passing by this big ass planet inside this ship with all these long hallways, all this stuff, tubing, circuits, people waking up in these pods. It's such an homage to everything that the 70s has been up until that point that is so hard to ignore. So Alien is something unreal. I put it under Carrie though, because I couldn't sleep for 5 days after I watched Carrie the first time. I don't know this actor's name. I always forget. She gives some of the best acting in horror that I don't think could ever really be topped. And we all know what I'm talking about. The iconic stare, the iconic wide-eyed, unblinking, unnerving stare. I remember seeing that for the first time. Couldn't sleep after that. All I would see is that face. And watching it recently, not as scared, luckily. Honestly, was worried. I get worried every time I decide to watch Carrie because I'm like, I don't want to be terrified of this face. But I was watching it and trying to just focus on it from like a technical perspective. And I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. You know, they have these shots that they're pulling off in this gym scene. And mind you, this is in the 70s, so it's like they have to figure out how to do this scene of how to like how many shots it took to like get from the angle of the girl walking from under the bleachers to then staring at the bucket to getting the teacher's reaction to then finally getting the bucket drop, and that bucket drop being so has to go right, because that's a fucking huge cleanup if they have to, every take they have to do. So all of that, right, mind you, the sequence itself is also happening at a slower rate. So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I wonder how fast they were actually moving when they shot it, because clearly they're not moving in slow motion in real life, but it's shot that way. And so thinking about what it was like to be on that set to do something like that, you must have, I feel like everybody must have been on edge, right? And there's so many cool shots of like even with the silhouette of the bully's hands on the rope. I don't know what time period it's from. Should have did the research. But it reminds me of like old timey horror films, like where it's like it's puppet shows or whatever, and it's showing you just the silhouette. Like I'm like that's just classic right there. Like for the 70s, that's them paying homage to retro shit, right? That's retro to them, and now that's layered into this movie that's also now kind of retro. So it's like it just adds on. And the only real practical effects we see is really with the hose. I mean, she does some telekinesis stuff, right? But that scene on its own, iconic. But the part that scared the fuck out of me, even today, was so after all that, she goes home. She's walking down the street. She goes up to her house, walks up the stairs to her room, goes into the bathroom, turns on the light, and the fucking mom is in the corner behind the door, just standing there. Scared the shit out of me. Because it didn't, like, the thing with the 70s, right? They don't put any attention onto the scare itself. They just want to scare the shit out of you. So there was no build up to it, right? It was all silent, no music. This movie also had very little score, which I thought was fascinating. Very little score. So did Texas Chainsaw. Very little score. Alien, very little score. When this moment happens, psychologically, your brain, right? Because the funny thing is, Drax makes this joke in Guardians of the Galaxy. If you stand very still, right, people won't see you. And that sounds so stupid if it's not applied in the right way. In this movie, it's applied in the right way. This mom was standing so fucking still that you literally don't register her there, and your brain freaks out when you do, because you didn't see her there immediately. Whether you saw her there when she turned on the light, or it took you a few seconds just on that still shot to even notice that there's someone there, right? And I can imagine in the theaters people actually screaming, in that moment. Like, that's like, that takes skill. That takes very smart directing. And then I watched it again, and I'm like, damn, yeah, she's there the whole fucking time. From the moment Carrie walks up to the stairs to the moment she enters the bathroom, she's just there. And I can imagine on set, it seems like very silly to do this, but it's also very exciting because you're creating suspense and a scare that people are going to be able to not see until it's too late. So it's a very sophisticated level of horror, in my opinion. Like, one of the scariest shots, aside from the iconic stare, just because the mom herself has been so unsettling. So I have to put Carrie above Alien, just because the scares in Carrie stick with me harder than the scares in Alien. So I think that's everything on the list. Top five, right? What was the top? So if we're keeping track, right? It's Texas Chainsaw, Carrie, Alien, Invasion of the Bodies. No, The Exorcist, and then Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And I know there's a ton of more horror movies in the 70s, but we're not gonna, you know, we don't. No, we can't. We don't have enough time. I wish I went through all the movies on this list, because I feel like the rest of them. I mean, maybe as I get through the list, we'll probably talk about them. Depends, because the list gets weird. Like, it's not, like I said, this is in no way a master list of, like, the definitive ones, because I only picked the ones from my experience, from my perspective, that I feel resonate with what scares me. I could reveal what's on the 80s. On my 80s list, these aren't ranked. This is just what I have. Return of the Living Dead, Killer Clowns, The Evil Dead, Poltergeist, and Hellraiser. Now, I feel like people will look at this list and be like, the only movie on that list I would add, I think that's worthy. The only two movies are Evil Dead and Hellraiser. And I can tell you, you're wrong. To me, these movies are what I think about when I think of the 80s, just a little bit. There are more, but I can't put them all. I can't put Nightmare on Elm Street. I can't put things like that, because to me, that's just it's too easy. And again, if I'm not necessarily scared of it, then I don't know if it's worth being put on the list. It could be iconic, yes, but this isn't about the iconic movies of the 70s. This is just my list. So we'll talk about those when I get through them. And yeah, I don't. Hmm. It's been very educational. It's been very educational. I'm trying to think. Is there? I didn't like save any clips or anything. I guess the scariest one was Carrie for me. Like, the moment, like, those two shots were really scary. Texas Chainsaw is just loud. Like, the screaming is just up there. I looked on Reddit, and they were talking about the shot of the girl walking up to the house, and, like, the low angle, and the creative decision making on that angle is just is just like circular within everybody involved. And I'm like, that's crazy. I love when like, shots are made very specific to give you something, as opposed to just being a standard shot. And all the movies on this list in the 70s, without a doubt, use every shot to evoke something in you, whether it's unease, uncertainty, dread, hope, fear, whatever. It's crazy. It's crazy how horror movies seem to be a lot more poetic in the 70s than in today. Like, it's hard to do that. And I guess the good ones do. You think about the good ones of the modern day. I do have a list of the modern day ones that I just goofed around with. But, I do think about Talk to Me, or yeah, obviously more recent times stuff like Sinners, or even Get Out. There is that level of attention where it's like, we're going to use this shot because when people see it from this angle, they're going to be thinking this. We're going to choose this way of discussing this topic. We're going to frame it this way, etc. There is a level of craftsmanship that comes to this stuff that I think makes horror movies really cool. And people discount horror movies because of, I think, shallow reasons. There are movies that get poorly made because of how the 70s and even before that set the foundation for how horror movies could work. So when you overuse the jump scare or very obviously lay out breadcrumbs to something that we all know is coming, then yeah, that's a bad way to do it. Try harder, you know? And I think that's the horror. That's the problem. Like I can't put Insidious or The Conjuring on a modern day great horror movie. You know, I mean I might. I think I put Insidious. I don't know if I could put Insidious because yeah, it was a new it was you know, it was a good horror movie for the time, but it also does a lot of that stuff too. Whereas like, are these shots? These some of these shots are standard, but like, what is this shot? How is this shot really filling out why we feel what we're feeling right now? Like, there's a shot in Alien where Ash, the android, right, and early in the film where you technically aren't supposed to know he's an android, and you also don't know about the symbolism that they're doing with this movie where it's like the way they frame all the male characters into the shot before they frame Ripley into the shot at any point in the beginning, right? And then there's also a moment, so there's this moment with Ash where he knows the true purpose of the mission, which is to capture the creature. And the way the shot is framed is that he's all the way on the left side and there's all this open space. And this is at a moment where Ripley is discussed. They're all trying to figure out whether or not they should leave or stay or whatever. You know, it's this definitive moment, and the shot's on Ash, and he has a decision to make, and he's about to say something, and because he's the bad guy and he knows they have to stay, the way they frame the shot is weighted, and it's weighted in such a way that he has so much power in this decision that they don't know the truth. We as the audience don't know the truth, and yet the shot right here is telling you the truth right now, that he is a bad guy and that he doesn't have their best intentions, right? But because none of that was laid out to you, none of that was breadcrumbs, none of that was, you know, force fed to you or anything. It's just going to be there as a piece of the puzzle for you to come back and realize later. It makes the movie rewatchable. You can rewatch all these movies and see those little clues of what's to come. And Carrie, obviously, the buildup of how her mother dies in tandem with the way Jesus is crucified, right? There's so many great, like, you don't, I'm done. We gotta move on. We gotta move on. We gotta move on. Hollow movies are something crazy. Horror movies are something scary for a whole different reason. You know what I mean? It takes crazy work to get horror movies popping, and they're not easy. They're not easy. So if horror movies are shit right now, it's because they're just making them. They're not actually trying to make them scary. The ones that are good are the ones that are scary. I'll put it like that. I never have to worry about Robert Eggers. I think his werewolf movie will be scary as shit. Be scary as fuck. I don't know if I'll trust another Blumhouse movie, you know? And I don't know. No, we can't talk. This isn't. I need to do research. Or how about this? I'll do like Dr. Umar. I'll open up a school, and we'll just we'll never open it, and we'll just talk about opening up the school. That's it. We're done, right? Yeah, we're done. All right. So thank you for watching. Bonus episode, very first bonus episode, episode 36.5. Crazy. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, leave a like, subscribe, continue supporting the content. Otherwise, happy Halloween. I'm not doing a voice. Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. Get some fucking candy, dog. What are you doing? And what?